7 times he cut her off. 7 times he tried to silence her. But on the 8th, the room went silent. You could almost hear the air shift, like every eye in the chamber knew they had just witnessed something that would not stay trapped inside those 4 walls. Jasmine Crockett's words struck like lightning, clean, sharp, unforgettable. And in that frozen moment, Rand Paul, the man who had played interrupter-in-chief, had no reply. His smirk faded, his grip on the room cracked, and history quietly stamped a new line in bold ink. Imagine the setting. A hearing room lined with wood, polished but heavy with the scent of power and ego. Cameras pointed in every direction, 100 eyes darting between one senator and one congresswoman. The stakes weren't just the policy. On paper, it was the battle over who gets to speak, who gets to be heard, and who gets to be silenced. Rand Paul leaned forward again and again, his voice slicing through Crockett's sentences like interruptions were his birthright. He had the floor, the seniority, the arrogance of years in that chamber. But across from him sat Jasmine Crockett, calm, patient, holding her ground as though she knew something the rest of us didn't. Because she did. Every time he broke in, she let him. Every time he brushed past her words, she marked it down with a stillness that seemed almost deliberate. To those watching at home, it felt like injustice in real time. To her, it was preparation. 7 times he tried, 7 times she endured. And then came the 8th. The chamber grew still, the cameras locked, and Crockett answered with a single line that burned itself into the memory of everyone listening. It was not shouted. It was not delivered with rage. It was calm, measured, devastating. The kind of line that tells you dignity will always cut deeper than arrogance. What you're about to witness isn't just a debate. It isn't even just a clash of personalities. It is something larger, a moment. When truth refuses to be silenced, when patience turns into power, and when the story of America itself, who gets a voice and who gets ignored, unfolds in real time. But how did it come to this point of boiling tension? To understand, we must go back. The hearing began like so many others in Washington. Polished wood desks, stacks of papers, microphones switched on, and cameras blinking red as they streamed every word to a nation divided. On the surface, it was supposed to be a simple discussion, another entry in the endless calendar of committee meetings. But inside that room, the tension was thicker than the air conditioning could cut. People weren't just listening to policy. They were waiting to see who would dominate, who would be heard, and who would be erased. At the center of it all was Rand Paul, a man known not only for his politics, but for his habit of making his presence felt in the loudest ways. He had built a reputation as the interrupter, the one who believed his words mattered more than anyone else's. It wasn't new. For years he had leaned on his voice as if it were a hammer, cutting people off, dismissing their thoughts, trying to box them into silence. To some, it looked like confidence. To others, it reeked of arrogance. Across from him sat Jasmine Crockett, and everything about her presence contrasted his. Where Paul leaned in with sharpness, Crockett leaned back with poise. Where he filled the room with noise, she held her words like treasures, releasing them with care. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't wave her hands. She didn't let frustration escape her face. She embodied the quiet force of patience, a strength that doesn't shout but waits for the right moment to strike. That was what made this hearing different. This wasn't just about a senator and a congresswoman clashing over points of policy. It was about respect. It was about truth. And it was about representation. When Rand Paul cut her off, he wasn't just stepping on a colleague's words. He was stepping on the people she represented. The families, the communities, the generations that saw their own voices in hers. For viewers at home, the interruptions didn't feel procedural. They felt personal. Every time Paul brushed past her sentence, millions felt the familiar sting of being dismissed in their own lives, at work, in classrooms, in their neighborhoods. And every time Crockett held her ground, they saw something more, dignity refusing to bend. The stakes grew higher with each exchange. This wasn't a courtroom where objections could be struck from the record. This was live, unfiltered, carried. across screens and replayed in clips that would live long after the hearing ended. Crockett wasn't just fighting to finish her thought. She was fighting to show that no one, no matter how powerful, had the right to silence her. And the room felt it. The staffers shifting in their chairs felt it. The journalists scribbling down notes felt it. The viewers at home watching through Twitter live streams felt it. Everyone knew they weren't just witnessing a spat. They were watching the weight of history press down on one woman's shoulders, testing her resolve, daring her to break. But Jasmine Crockett didn't break. She absorbed each interruption like a wave against rock, steady, unmoved, waiting for the tide to turn. She knew that patience wasn't weakness, it was strategy. And soon, very soon, the moment would come when the patience ended and the power shifted. Because what happens next doesn't just shake the room, it shakes the nation watching from home. Rand Paul's career has always carried the mark of someone who wanted to be louder than the room itself. To his supporters, he's painted as a maverick, the libertarian voice who challenges the establishment. He talks about freedom, about individual rights, about government overreach. But behind the speeches and slogans lies a pattern that tells another story, a story of arrogance, dismissal, and a habit of silencing others when their truths don't align with his script. It wasn't the first time Rand Paul had clashed with colleagues in ways that left a bitter aftertaste. In hearing after hearing, his interruptions weren't subtle. They were sharp, calculated, almost as if he believed that cutting off an opponent mid-sentence made his argument stronger. He would lean forward, raise his hand, and speak over others with the tone of a man who thought his time mattered more than theirs. For years, he perfected the art of talking louder, faster, and longer, turning the chamber into a stage where only his voice could claim center. And yet, here's the contradiction. Paul presents himself as a defender of liberty, a man of principle, the politician who claims he fights for the little guy against the machine of Washington. But if liberty means anything, it means listening. It means giving space for every voice to be heard, even those who don't fit neatly into his worldview. Still, time and again his actions betrayed his words. He fought for freedom with one hand, but with the other, he tried to snatch away the microphone from those he considered beneath him. Colleagues noticed. They always do. Behind the official politeness of congressional halls, there were whispers, staffers muttering in frustration as they watched him bulldoze through debates, senators exchanging quick glances when Paul launched into yet another long-winded speech. The quiet shuffle of papers, the tired sighs, the unmistakable eye rolls from those who had seen this performance before. To them, his interruptions weren't passion. They were theater. And theater grows stale when the same actor refuses to leave the stage. The arrogance wasn't just in how he spoke, it was in how he carried himself. Rand Paul had the walk of someone convinced of his own untouchability. Years of political survival had hardened him, given him confidence that he could outtalk, outlast, and outshine anyone. To him, silencing others wasn't rudeness, it was strategy. And when you believe you're always the smartest in the room, you rarely stop to notice the walls closing in. But arrogance has a way of setting traps. The louder he became, the more people tuned out his words and tuned into the disrespect behind them. When he cut off colleagues mid-thought, he revealed not strength but insecurity. When he dismissed voices with casual smirks, he showed not conviction but condescension. Over time, his interruptions began to define him more than his ideals ever did. And this is where the villain archetype becomes clear. Every great political drama has one, a figure who mistakes volume for truth, power for respect, and arrogance for strength. Rand Paul stepped into that role willingly, not because he saw himself as a villain, but because he never considered how his behavior looked to the millions watching. He believed that dominance equaled victory. He believed silencing someone meant winning the argument. But what he didn't see was that every interruption stacked against him like bricks in a wall, building toward a moment when someone would finally break through. In the hearing with Jasmine Crockett, Paul's behavior was nothing new. It was the same old act, leaning in, cutting off, smirking, brushing aside. To him, it was just another day of control. To everyone else, it was déjà vu. And yet this time was different, because unlike others who had rolled their eyes, sighed in silence, or quietly endured, Crockett refused to crumble. The whispers of exasperation in the chamber weren't just from colleagues anymore. They were echoed by viewers at home, millions who had felt the sting of dismissal in their own lives. Each interruption reminded them of bosses who never listened, teachers who brushed them off, politicians who didn't see them. Rand Paul wasn't just interrupting a congresswoman. He was interrupting them. That is what he never understood. His arrogance made him blind to the weight of his actions. He thought he was silencing one voice, but in truth, he was poking at a collective wound shared by countless others. His downfall wasn't going to come from a slip of the tongue or a failed policy. It was going to come from underestimating the power of patience and the quiet strength of someone who refused to be ignored. And so, he leaned forward again. He interrupted again. The smirk returned, the dismissive tone sharpened. He thought he was still in control. He thought the room still belonged to him. But every villain's arrogance is only as strong as the silence of those they target. Until one voice breaks through. Jasmine Crockett did not walk into Congress by accident. Her story began far from the marble floors of Washington, in the neighborhoods where ordinary people worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table, where mothers stretched every dollar and fathers carried the weight of generations. She grew up seeing the kind of America that rarely gets a microphone, the America of resilience, of survival, of dignity earned the hard way. And from the start, she understood what it meant to fight for a voice. Crockett's rise was not smooth, not paved with privilege. It was a climb uphill with obstacles at every turn. She knew the sting of being underestimated, of being told she wasn't enough, of walking into rooms where her presence was treated like a disruption instead of a contribution. But instead of letting that break her, she carried those dismissals like fuel. Each time someone doubted her, she sharpened her focus. Each time she was told to stay quiet, she learned how to speak louder, not in volume, but in impact. Her early years as a lawyer built the foundation of her calm defiance. She didn't just practice law, she lived it in defense of the marginalized, the overlooked, the people most likely to be silenced. Every case was more than paperwork. It was a mirror of the larger fight for justice in America. She saw firsthand how power bends rules, how authority tries to shut down dissent, how ordinary citizens struggle against systems stacked against them. And with each case, her spine stiffened. She would not fold in the face of intimidation. She would not bow to arrogance. When she stepped into politics, she carried that same fire. But politics demanded something more: patience. In community meetings, she listened to single mothers, veterans, and immigrants who had fought for the right to stand on American soil with pride. She carried their voices into every debate, every speech, every vote. They were not statistics to her. They were the people who shaped her, the people she knew by name, the people she could not forget even in the bright lights of Capitol Hill. This is why her presence in that Senate hearing was so powerful. She wasn't just Jasmine Crockett, the congresswoman. She was every person who had been cut off mid-sentence in a classroom. She was every worker ignored by a manager. She was every woman dismissed in a meeting. Her calm defiance was not an act. It was muscle memory, born of years in which silence was expected and resistance was punished. And it showed. Even as Rand Paul leaned forward, cutting her off, she did not raise her voice to match his. She did not let frustration spill into her face. She sat steady, almost still, holding the weight of the moment with the grace of someone who had carried heavier burdens before. To some, it looked like restraint. To those who knew her story, it looked like strategy. Because Jasmine Crockett knew what it meant to be underestimated. She knew what it meant to be treated as if her voice did not belong. And she knew the power of patience, the power of waiting for the right moment when truth, delivered with calm precision, could pierce arrogance like a blade. Her values, justice, dignity, service, were not campaign slogans. They were survival codes she had carried since childhood. She believed that leadership was not about speaking the loudest, but about lifting the silenced. She believed that respect could not be demanded by title alone. It had to be earned by action. And she believed that dignity, once shown, could disarm even the most persistent bully. This is why viewers connected to her so deeply. They saw in her a piece of themselves. They saw their own struggles reflected in her measured patience, their own frustrations mirrored in her silent endurance. And when she finally answered, when she finally delivered the line that would echo across the country, It felt like their answer too. The words they wished they had spoken in their own battles. Her story made that moment inevitable. No one else could have said it with the same weight. No one else could have carried those words with the same history behind them. Her line wasn't born in the heat of the hearing. It was born years earlier, in courtrooms and community halls, in long nights of preparation, in the countless times she was told to sit down and stay quiet. And so, in that chamber, with cameras rolling and millions unknowingly waiting, Jasmine Crockett met arrogance with dignity. She let Rand Paul build his wall of interruptions, one after another, higher and higher. She waited as he climbed it, thinking himself untouchable, and then with a single line she brought it all crashing down. And so, when the interruptions came one after another, she was ready. The chamber air was already tense when the debate began. Cameras clicked, pens scratched. Every eye in the room seemed to anticipate friction. It didn't take long. Interruption number 1. Senator Cruz's voice cut through before Jasmine Crockett had even finished her first sentence. A sharp, dismissive insertion, loud enough to jar, deliberate enough to send a message. This was his arena. Crockett paused, not startled but measured. She lowered her voice instead of raising it. A calm reply, steady, deliberate, as though refusing to wrestle in the mud. That calmness was her weapon, yet already observers leaned forward. The first strike had been thrown. Interruption number 2. Again he broke in, not to clarify, not to question, to dominate. His tone heavy with disdain rolled over her words. This time she drew a breath, a glance down at her notes. No flare of anger, no visible crack. She had promised herself long before she entered this room that she would not let someone else dictate her rhythm. But it didn't stop. Interruption number 3. His smirk, now unmistakable, almost performative. Dismissive hand gestures punctuated his words, like an actor playing to the crowd. Every flick of his wrist, every raised brow carried the same message. You don't belong here. Interruption number 4. Crockett's lips tightened for half a second, but she held steady. The room could sense her restraint, the discipline of someone who had fought too hard to squander composure on pettiness. She spoke again, but softer, as though daring him to overstep once more. He did. Interruption number 5. Louder this time, with a laugh beneath it. A mocking undertone designed not only to dismiss her words, but to belittle her presence. The imbalance was glaring. A senior senator with years of stagecraft against a first-term congresswoman. The optics of power leaned against her. Yet while Cruz's interruptions grew more animated, Crockett's silence became louder. She did not rise to the bait. She counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. To the audience watching at home, frustration built like static. Each time she opened her mouth, another wall slammed down. Social feeds buzzed. Why won't they let her speak? Why won't they let her finish? The injustice of the interruptions was felt beyond the walls of that chamber. And through it all, Jasmine Crockett sat unshaken. Rand Paul, seated nearby, leaned back with a smirk of his own. Arms folded, chin raised. His very posture another interruption without words. Dismissive gestures, eyes rolling, the practiced theater of belittlement. Yet Crockett never broke. Her fingers rested neatly on the desk. Her voice remained even, though clipped by constant breaks. Inside, she was already measuring the pattern. 7 interruptions, 8, she knew the count. She let him play his hand. This was no accident. This was a storm gathering. By the 6th cutoff, the tension in the room had shifted. Journalists scribbled harder, their pens racing to capture the spectacle. Spectators whispered in the gallery. Some shook their heads, some clenched their jaws. Everyone knew something was building, and Crockett knew too. Because silence, controlled silence, is not weakness. 'Tis preparation. Every second she held back, every clipped phrase she endured, she was coiling her reply tighter. The power imbalance was real, but Crockett was not there to match volume with volume. She was there to demonstrate the one thing her opponent lacked: restraint. Interruption number 7, the breaking point. Cruz leaned forward, voice raised higher, sharper. Theatrics now replaced argument. His words were not meant to persuade, they were meant to crush, and Crockett smiled. Just faintly, because by the 7th interruption, the chamber could feel it too. A hush, the kind of silence before thunder. Her composure was no longer a quiet defense. It had become an active warning. She had given him the rope. She had allowed him the stage. And now the room leaned forward for what everyone knew was coming. The silence before a storm. 7 times he tried. 7 times she endured. Each interruption had chipped at the rhythm of the chamber, like a hammer against stone. But Jasmine Crockett had not cracked. She had not bent. She had not even raised her voice. And that in itself had become a story. The room was taut with anticipation. Pens poised. Cameras ready. A hush-like static just before lightning. Interruption number 8. It came with all the predictability of arrogance. Cruz leaned forward again, voice sharp, tone mocking. He cut across her mid-sentence, slicing into her words like he had all afternoon. A sneer formed at the corner of his mouth. He thought the chamber was his, thought the script belonged to him. But this time Crockett did not pause. She did not swallow the silence and let it pass. Instead, she lifted her chin, just slightly. Enough for the cameras to catch. Enough for everyone in the room to sense the shift. A pause. A single heartbeat stretched long enough for the air to thicken. Journalists leaned forward. A cough somewhere in the gallery echoed like a gunshot. And then she spoke. Her words landed with the weight of a gavel. Calm. Precise. Deadly. You know what? I don't respond well to bullies. And if you think interrupting me makes you stronger, let me assure you, what it really shows is how weak you are. The chamber froze. Gasps rippled through the gallery. A camera flash blinded for a split second. Reporters' pens scratched like frenzied insects, trying to capture it before it vanished. For the first time all evening, Cruz had no reply. His lips parted, then closed. His smirk faltered. The performance sputtered. She did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. The power was in the calmness, the controlled precision of her delivery. She had not tried to out-yell him. She had let him exhaust himself, then dismantled him with a single, perfectly placed strike. 7 times he tried. 7 times she endured. On the 8th, she made history. The silence after her words was deafening. It wasn't just the absence of noise. It was the presence of something heavier. The realization that a line had been crossed, and then crossed back with fury, disguised as composure. Rand Paul shifted in his chair, his arms still crossed, but now his eyes darted. The smirk he had worn all afternoon slipped into something else. Uncertainty, even unease. His dismissive gestures faltered, hands fidgeting as if searching for a new role in the drama. And Crockett? She sat tall, her gaze steady, her breathing even. No gloating, no theatrics, just the serenity of someone who had known this moment would come, who had prepared her whole life for a confrontation exactly like this. In that instant, dignity triumphed, arrogance crumbled, but the story was no longer confined to that chamber, because the cameras were rolling. Within seconds, clips of the exchange hit Twitter. "Crockett destroys Cruz," blared one caption. Another, "She said what we've all been waiting to hear." Hashtags began forming before she had even finished her sentence. Maisu, Crockett, clap back. Stop interrupting. Mic drop moment. Memes spread faster than transcripts. Screenshots of Cruz's stunned expression juxtaposed against Crockett's calm face flooded Instagram and TikTok. Audio of her line became a soundbite, remixed with beats turned into reels, stitched into TikToks of everyday people confronting their bosses, their classmates, their critics. The eruption wasn't just political. It was cultural, because the drama in that chamber wasn't simply about a policy disagreement. It was about something deeper, more universal. A woman refusing to be silenced. A voice rising above contempt. A calm dignity shattering arrogance. For every viewer who had felt talked over in a meeting, dismissed in a classroom, mocked in a conversation, Crockett had just spoken for them. The chamber gasped. The internet roared. And Cruz sat silent. The blow-by-blow replayed endlessly. News anchors slowed the clip down frame by frame. "Watch her pause right here," one said, circling the moment Crockett raised her chin. That's the moment everything changed. Analysts dissected the body language. Cruz's tightened jaw, Paul's restless shift, Crockett's stillness. It was no longer a debate. It was a masterclass. 7 times he tried. 7 times she endured. On the 8th, she claimed the narrative. The dignity was hers. The shame was theirs, and yet Crockett didn't bask. She didn't even flinch when the room finally stirred again. Whispers erupting, cameras flashing like a storm. She simply continued her statement, calm, focused, as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. That restraint, that refusal to milk the moment, made it all the more powerful. Because the true explosion wasn't in that chamber. It was outside, on millions of screens. Didn't take hours. It didn't even take minutes. The clip exploded across the internet like dry brush meeting fire. 1 second, it was just another hearing. The next, it was the moment no one could stop replaying. The hashtags appeared first. Short, sharp, impossible to ignore. Jasmine Crockett clap back. Mic drop moment. Stop interrupting. They spread like wildfire, climbing Twitter's trending list by the hour. TikTok was next. Teenagers clipped her words to rap beats. Activists slowed her pause into cinematic slow motion, setting it against swelling violins. Memes flooded Instagram. Jasmine Crockett's calm face on one side, Rand Paul's stunned silence on the other, captioned with 3 words, game, set, match. By nightfall, late-night comedy shows had seized on it. A host quipped, Rand Paul finally found a doctor who could diagnose his problem. Dr. Crockett. Another replayed the clip with a laugh track, the audience howling as Paul's expression shifted from smug to shaken. But it wasn't just comedy. Commentators on cable news called it a cultural reset. Pundits on podcasts framed it as a turning point in political tone. This wasn't just Crockett versus Paul, one analyst said. This was dignity versus dismissal, respect versus arrogance, and America picked a side. Celebrities weighed in too. An imagined tweet from Kerry Washington read, Jasmine Crockett didn't just hold her ground. She gave every woman who's ever been talked over in a meeting the win we've been waiting for. Questlove posted the clip with fire emojis. Ava DuVernay added, this is why composure matters. Calm destroys chaos. The avalanche grew louder. Teachers shared the video with students as an example of courage. Parents played it for their daughters, saying, this is how you answer disrespect. Even sports figures joined in. An NBA player retweeted the clip with the caption, she hit him with the 3-pointer at the buzzer. And through it all, the contrast could not be sharper. Crockett's words echoed, played on loop across phones, TVs, and timelines. Meanwhile, Rand Paul's silence stretched longer, heavier. His office issued no statement. His defenders offered little more than nervous deflections. The man who never stopped talking had finally been muted, and the irony wasn't lost on anyone. For Jasmine Crockett, the moment transcended politics. It became a symbol. A congresswoman sitting in a room full of power, interrupted again and again, until she decided enough was enough. And with one line, she shifted the balance. Not with rage, not with shouting, but with composure that cut sharper than any insult. People didn't just watch it. They felt it. They shared it because it validated something personal. The frustration of being dismissed, the sting of being ignored, the satisfaction of seeing someone finally push back. It wasn't just viral, it was vindication. And as the days passed, the clip didn't fade. It grew. Commentators called it the line heard across America. Social media dubbed it the 8th interruption that ended them all. By the week's end, Crockett's face was everywhere. From magazine covers to YouTube explainers breaking down the Crockett effect. Rand Paul tried to move on. But silence followed him. Questions hounded him in hallways. Every step reminded him that the narrative was no longer his to control. For Crockett, it was different. She hadn't asked for the spotlight, but it found her. And with it came a message larger than politics. Respect is not given by those in power. It is claimed by those who refuse to be silenced. But beyond the laughs and memes, there was a deeper meaning the nation couldn't ignore. When the dust of the viral storm began to settle, what lingered wasn't just the laughter, the memes, or even the endless replay of that mic drop moment. What lingered was the feeling, the unmistakable sense that something deeper had been spoken into the air that day. Jasmine Crockett's calm defiance wasn't just a response to one man's interruptions. It was a declaration of dignity, of what it means to stand firm in truth when others try to erase your voice. Her moment reminded us of something we often forget. America doesn't move forward when voices are silenced. It doesn't move forward when arrogance drowns out reason. It moves forward when courage steps up, when truth is spoken, and when those who represent the voiceless refuse to let disrespect define the debate. That single line, delivered after 7 interruptions, wasn't crafted in some speechwriter's office. It came from a lifetime of resilience. It came from carrying the weight of community expectations, from surviving the sting of dismissal, from knowing that silence only empowers arrogance. And so when she spoke, she didn't just speak for herself. She spoke for millions who had felt the same sting. There's power in that. Not the kind of power measured in votes or titles, but the power of example. The power of showing that you can sit in the middle of chaos and still choose composure, that you can be disrespected and still answer with dignity, that you can be underestimated and yet rise above it. And that's why this moment grew beyond the walls of Congress, because deep down, every person watching understood the message. Disrespect is temporary, but dignity lasts. Lies collapse, but truth endures. Noise fades, but courage echoes. Crockett's stand reminds us that democracy is not a performance of the loudest. It's a chorus of the brave. It depends not on those who interrupt, but on those who insist on finishing their sentence. It thrives not when arrogance wins, but when patience proves stronger. The lesson is universal. Whether in politics, in the workplace, in classrooms, or even in family arguments, respect matters. Listening matters. Standing tall when others try to knock you down matters. Because when one person finds the strength to hold their ground, they give silent permission to countless others to do the same. That's why Crockett's line went viral. Not because it was witty, not because it was sharp, but because it was true. And truth, when spoken with calm conviction, doesn't just silence arrogance, it inspires resilience. In that way, her 8th reply wasn't only for Rand Paul. It was for the teachers ignored in staff meetings, for the women cut off in boardrooms, for the immigrants talked over in courtrooms, for every person who has ever swallowed words while someone else trampled over them. It was a reminder, your voice matters. And when you choose to use it with courage, the world has no choice but to listen. So yes, it was a viral moment. Yes, it made for hashtags, for memes, for late-night punchlines. But it was also a quiet turning point, a cultural reminder that dignity is not weakness. It is strength. It is the steady fire that arrogance can never extinguish. And so we are left with a question that stretches beyond the hearing room, beyond politics, and into our own lives. What do we do with this story? Do we laugh, share it, and move on? Or do we let it remind us of our own power, our own right to speak, our own duty to stand for truth? Because in the end, the choice of what to do with this story is yours. Rand Paul interrupted her 7 times. 7 times he tried to silence her, to prove that arrogance could overpower patience. But her 8th line rewrote the story. That single moment didn't just belong to her. It belonged to everyone who has ever been dismissed, talked over, or underestimated. And now it belongs to you. If you believe dignity is stronger than arrogance, if you believe truth carries more weight than noise, if you believe that America moves forward when voices refuse to be silenced, then don't let this moment stop here. Share it, tell it, pass it on to someone who needs to be reminded that composure can conquer chaos. This community is more than viewers. It's a movement of people who understand the power of courage. When you subscribe, when you join us, you're not just clicking a button. You're becoming part of a larger story. One where justice, resilience, and truth still matter. One where arrogance doesn't get the last word, because every share keeps the fire alive. Every comment amplifies the message. Every subscription strengthens the voice of those who refuse to bow down to disrespect. Remember this, history isn't written by interruptions. It isn't written by those who shout the loudest. History is written by those who stand their ground, who speak their truth, who refuse to be silenced. And tonight, as this story echoes beyond the walls of that hearing room, the question is simple. Will you help carry it forward?